We have been talking with Guyanese about their expectations from Budget 2024, and Guyanese are yearning for economic and social policies that will uplift every corner of Guyana. After watching last night's presentation, we've witnessed the bittersweet reviews about the budget from the parliamentary opposition and the government caucuses, and even from public servants who are viewing the budget as another private foreign company budget. So, gentlemen, tell me, what are your thoughts on this year's budget? We'll start with Mr. Luke.
Thank you. This budget, I think, has demonstrated that the government's focus on infrastructure at the expense of other elements of the budget that could add great value to Guyanese, improve their standard of living, and set the country up for long-term growth. That the government prioritizes infrastructure and the opportunities for corruption and sadly waste that come from that above all else. We've seen the government put forward $204 billion for roads and bridges, which is larger than the health budget, which is larger than the education budget. And it seems to me that healthcare and education are just as important, if not more important, than roads and bridges. It is therefore alarming to see that this is the way that the government has chosen to approach this. More than that, though, we really have in Guyana, just to take a step back, come to, as we've been speaking about for some time, a bit of a crossroads here, because we're looking at the second to last budget. Hopefully the PP will be able to produce for a long time. But the second to last budget of this government, where we've crossed $1 trillion, and where the country is, as Mr. Jabour I'm sure will point out as well, the adjusting for prices, that's the 10th highest income per capita in the entire world, has had multiple years of having the highest growth rates in the entire world, and where citizens still are crying out as to how difficult it is to make ends meet in Guyana, and as to where exactly these trillions of dollars are going. In fact, we even saw that last year's spending, when you include the supplementals, is equivalent to 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014's budgets combined. This one is even larger. And then, when you look at the direct benefits to Guyanese, whether it's pensions, which are only $3,000, which is $100 per day, really. When you look at the Because We Care cash grant, which I think many people thought would be increased to about $50,000, being only increased by a few $1,000s. Really, that I think has put many people off and has illustrated that the government's priorities don't lie with helping Guyanese to realize some of the immediate benefits that are coming from our oil industry, which has contributed in excess of $1 billion US to the contribution to the budget this year.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Jabour, I want to pick your mind for a bit on the same question, on your expectations from the 2024 budget.
Well, let's be honest, expectations are something that I try not to dabble in too much. I wait until reality sets in for us to understand. The reason I say that is because, in my opinion, when you have put forward a budget that is so large, but then again, in comparison to the amount of money that was spent last year is not that big of a difference, then I honestly can't expect much more of a different scenario in our economy and the people's lives when it comes to this year versus last year. So my issue will always boil back down to, everyone can talk a cheap game. Everybody can start throwing out money. The government can pretend that they are doing Guyanese a favor by spending our own money. But the truth of the matter is, until the people start to feel it, which we haven't for the last 4 years, I do not have any kind of significant expectations other than, again, the priorities of the government seem to lie with a specific group of people. When it comes to, the favored few and all these people that have opened construction companies, you've seen some very odd areas of spending, like it's highlighted for private optical companies to get subsidies from the government for citizens. We're not against citizens getting the benefit of optical services, but at the same time, it's such an odd scenario when you've raised pension by $3,000, but at the same time, you've now allocated twice the amount of money for people to go and get glasses with private companies. And then again, something like sports equipment. You've taken VAT and duties off of sports equipment, but then at the same time have only raised the cash grant for children by $5,000 for the year. So I sit down there and I really say, where exactly are the priorities? Because it doesn't seem like it's on the people. And that's my reality of how I have interpreted the 2024 budget.
You would have mentioned poverty, and you would have mentioned several factors within this year's budget. I know that is one of the things many leaders within Guyana have been discussing: poverty. Poverty is on the rise, inflation is on the rise, cost of living is on the rise. But can you say if budget 2024 actually shifted or would shift the poverty margin?
Well, that's again a difficult question to ask as we have just got the budget. What we can say is for anyone that has felt it last year and has felt like cost of living has risen, even though the government, as I said, has spent the same amount of money last year, then I cannot imagine that it's going to have a very large impact spending the same amount of money again this year. Again, the government can claim that they've made specific areas, like for example the threshold. Okay, great. They've risen the threshold to $100,000. All right, that's your tax bracket. Okay, now in reality, let's be real. That's only adding an additional $15,000 into the pockets of Guyanese per month. Now let's speak about to any real, rational, hard-working Guyanese. What is $15,000 a month more going to do? We know the cost of living in this country has risen in 2023 by in and about 20%. That's being conservative, right? So if you've only risen my salary by $15,000 a month, that is only equal to 15%. Now here's another figure that baffles me that the government threw out. That startled me because let's be realistic. No government previous in this country, including this one now as it stands, like to give out statistics, okay? Because statistics show the flaws. Statistics show our weak points. Now, what startled me about the threshold rising, the threshold change, was they were proudly saying that 13,000 Guyanese are going to benefit from this. Now, I sat down and went, 13,000 Guyanese benefiting from the $100,000 threshold that they've now risen it to. You are proud to tell me that 13,000 Guyanese are living on $500 a month? Like, that's mind-blowing to me. Like, how can that figure at any way, shape, or form be acceptable? That is keeping, and going back to your word, that is keeping people impoverished. Okay, that is ensuring that people stay poor. So if you know the cost of living is rising, more than that 15% you've risen to that threshold, right? The truth is, you're just keeping people at a 5% negative position when it comes to their monthly income. Let's say the 5, and that's being so generous in thinking the 100,000 could keep them surviving, on a daily basis to begin with. So,
okay, Mr. Lowe. Mr. Jabour would have mentioned we cannot use the 2024 budget to actually, understand the shift in the poverty margin. Let's go to the 2023 budget, because that was just around the corner. The year is still fresh. Having passed a budget, 900 plus billion, and then went back into the National Assembly and asked for supplementary budget. This was as recent of November, December. And now you're in January passing a $1.1 trillion budget. Let me hear what are your thoughts on the poverty.
Well, I'll say two things. The first is regarding this budget, and then I'll go back to 2023. You don't hear, and I can't recall hearing maybe once, the Minister for Finance, because I can't say Minister of Finance, the Minister for Finance use the word poverty. He just doesn't talk about it as if it's not an issue.
Do you think they believe in poverty?
No, I mean, in the country, I think
I don't think it's a religious view.
I mean, A year or two ago, UNICEF put out a 43% poverty figure for Guyana, and we've seen similar figures before. We've seen high inflation rates since the pandemic for Guyana, which has, of course, pushed more and more people into poverty. We've not seen the government put out statistics regarding the unemployment rate. And I know normally if you're proud of something, you put out the statistics.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me raises a serious alarm bell around whether or not people have been able to get jobs. And then we've not seen statistics again around any increases in wages and income across this economy. This, I think, paints a very gloomy, a very worrisome picture regarding poverty in Guyana. But for me, what is most alarming is that the government does not understand that it has to take substantial, direct, and serious measures to deal with poverty in our society in order for us to be able to eradicate poverty. That, to me, is one of the vital questions that Guyana will face. One of the most important questions is what we're going to do about poverty. And we must, of course, juxtapose this with the fact that we've had several years of being the country with the highest growth in the entire world. Not 1 year. Multiple years of 40%, 20%, 60%, 30% growth. And you're still not talking about poverty. That to me is extremely troubling. Now when we look back at budget 2023, some of the measures that might have been used to improve standards of living and help to fight the cost of living and fight poverty in Guyana, the government had little interest in that. We saw public servants receive a salary increase 6.5%. That was below the rate of inflation according to the United States State Department. That means that it wasn't an increase, it was a decrease, really. We've also seen the government put in measly less than 1% of the national budget towards dealing with the cost of living crisis, direct cost of living mitigation. This year, again, it's less than 1% of the budget. But even more crucially, we saw that the first 11 months or so of the year, the government couldn't figure out what to do with this money. That either means that they're just not interested in the cost of living crisis, or it means that they don't have any ideas. Now in this year's budget, you see again the $7 million put aside for cost of living mitigation. But what do they say? They say we're going to consult people to decide what to do. We've been putting forward from the opposition a whole raft of measures to deal with the cost of living crisis, from vouchers for canter operators so they can get low fuel prices from farm to market, to an expansion of agriculture around the country. We put forward several measures because we understand that this is really the most difficult cost of living crisis for the last 40 years, a prolonged period of time. Now, to me, what that indicates is that poverty is going to continue to be a problem on the government, on the PUP, and that there's no recognition from their perspective that deliberate efforts have to be taken. So really it's become quite a tragic situation.
On that note, the government, can't say we, the government would have put forward a hefty budget. And we've seen as of recent, there are problems with the PAC, the check-in system within the country to ensure that there's transparency
Public accountability.
and accountability. Correct. Tell me, in this year's budget, are there any measures to addressing corruption in itself? Given the fact that the PSC is one of the most important committee and it's at a start.
Sure. One of the things, I haven't observed any measures to deal with corruption, but I'd say two things. The first is that there's been estimates put forward by the IMF that corruption, mismanagement, which they won't say corruption, but that's kind of what you read into it. That is far higher in Guyana, even than our Caribbean neighbors, with us losing 41 cents off of every dollar that is spent in the government's public investment program. That last year was in excess of $400 billion, which means we lost something like $172 billion due to corruption and incompetence. I mean, $172 billion is the size of a national budget, not too far in the distant past. That's the first thing. The second thing is that when you look at the experience, remember we are a petro state and a state that's getting significant oil revenues. When you look at the experience of petro states, often what happens is that infrastructure projects are not really meant to actually improve people's standards of living. They are actually mechanisms for corruption. So it would seem to me that if the government is focused on corruption, you wouldn't see anti-corruption programs. To me, that is incredibly alarming. The Public Accounts Committee being stalled is similarly alarming. And again, the lack of recognition that it is a problem, I think it gives you a sense that the government is perfectly happy to allow corruption to persist. We've even seen with the Public Procurement Commission some complaints be raised around the award of contracts. The Public Procurement Commission say, oh, they can't look into it, they can't investigate it, whereas the Constitution gives them very broad powers to deal with these issues. So this to me indicates that we've got a government that is just not focused on corruption whatsoever, but rather the experience of other countries, petro-states, is that corruption is name of the game.
Jabour, same question. Do you think in the budget 2024 there are measures to address corruption, given the fact that over the past years we would have seen persons saying the government has a terrible track record with management of state funds? We would have also seen reports coming out from various state departments in terms of mismanagement of public funds, and the list goes on from the other institution. With this year's budget in its hefty state, do you think that the government will be able to manage?
All right. My favorite article out of 2023 was actually from December 2023, in which we saw the Honorable Minister Gail Teixeira state, if you believe that there's corruption in the government, prove it. And that statement to me always ends up signifying that there definitely is corruption. If somebody is standing there and refuses to give you any documentation, refuses to attend Public Accounts Committee meetings, and refuses to divulge into any audits, into any cash grants that they've given away, let's just use the basics. The agriculture grant, the COVID grant, the children's school grant. If we have no audits or no information on any of these things, yet you're telling us to prove that there's corruption, then there must be corruption. You not giving me the document. Okay, I want to prove corruption too. Please for the audits. Nah, we ain't giving you that. But then now challenging me to prove it? Well, I'm sorry. You are obviously hiding something. So when I see scenarios, evolve from infrastructure corruption scandals, international organizations coming in. I saw there was a lovely clip done by Francis Bailey, in which he highlighted who the oil blocks were given to, who were the awardees of the oil blocks. And he did a phenomenal piece that, I encourage anybody to go and see it, of some of the people that were given, and they were these absolute shell sham of corporations that were given these oil blocks and clearly do not have capacity in any way, shape, or form to explore, or for that means to produce. So the truth of the matter is, when we watch the little breadcrumb trail, you realize that the government has no interest in addressing corruption whatsoever. They're actually going to do everything in their power to not have us divulge in any way, shape, or form into whether corruption exists or not. Corruption was not spoken about in the budget. There were no measures in place to say, we are going to have X amount of accountability through these organizations or committees. What we are looking for, and I can tell you this on the side of a new and united Guyana, because this has been our platform, when it comes to even constitutional reform, right, is that we have so many organizations that need to be restructured to gain certain autonomy, that the government in power, whether with a majority or not, can get themselves involved and dictate how those organizations are going to produce information. And that's our problem in this country. We have not even remotely close to enough information on whether corruption exists or not, other than the fact that I'm going to sit here as a logical human being, as a citizen of Guyana, and I'm going to say, we are now earning $78,000 US per capita, the 10th largest in the world. Mm-hmm. And I can sit down here and say, where the hell is the money? Because I'm not seeing, $78,000 US per capita per person in development. I am not seeing it in human capital expenditure. So where is the money? And if you can prove it, then I don't think it falls on the burden of the accuser in this case. This is not court. This is a government that is put in place by the people, and you have to be accountable to the people. We are asking you to show us where the money is. If you can't produce that, then the burden is on you to prove it, not on me to prove that you're corrupt.
You just spoke about constitutional reform. We know pre-2020, the government was big on pushing this constitutional reform. We would have seen, I'm going to pick
I can pick at him just now. Yeah. Go ahead, I like this topic.
We would have seen the previous government, APNU, coming in, pushing constitutional reform, fail. We would have seen the same thing with the current administration. But yet, in this year's budget, and the budget before, and the budget prior, we've seen no budgetary allocation to actually address this matter. And if you actually go into the streets and actually hear from citizens, constitutional reform is one of the biggest things. Ever since the election case, constitutional reform was birthed, and it was the idea being touted by government. Do you think, I just want to pick at you here, do you think that they actually want to see constitutional reform? Because with constitutional reform, with all of these issues can be corrected internally, institutionally. Do you think they actually want to see constitutional reform?
Let's start with the first and foremost mistake that we're making here. No money needs to be allocated for constitutional reform to occur. It don't cost nothing. There's no financial expenditure. And I can tell you, as being involved in the political realm myself, I can tell you for a fact that there are many experts out there, many Guyanese, that want to see best for Guyana and are willing to lend their services to Guyana in order to create a solid framework for constitutional reform to occur. You know why constitutional reform doesn't occur? Because nor APNU nor PPP are interested in it. Why? Because this winner-take-all two-party system benefits the two of them. All right? This is a simple concept. Let's start with the easiest one. If you create a minority government with a third party, then you can have a balance of power in which everyone, opposition, government, executive, are all accountable to each other. Okay? Everybody has to consult for decisions to be made. Now, let's look at what the Constitution currently holds when it comes to any third party, even possibly existing. As it stands, the Constitution dictates that the main opposition and the government are both funded by taxpayers. There are no provisions for third parties to get any financial help. Now, let's go as far as saying, well, Kian, what are you trying to say? You're trying to say that any person that goes and opens a third party or starts a third party should get financing? That's not what I'm saying at all. But as a third party currently, as ANUG currently has a seat in Parliament, as the only party outside of APNU, AFC and PPP, how come there is no budgetary allocation to this party if we've already won a seat through the representation of the people? How come those people, how come we then are not given that opportunity to have an allocation of funding in order for us to maintain? So when you see these small scenarios, these small aspects of the Constitution that ensure that the two-party system remains, then you will never ever find that the PPP or the APNU AFC are willing to have constitutional reform. They will both preach it till the end of time when in opposition. Show me one of them that have done it in history when in government. It does not benefit anyone, either of the two of them, to have constitutional reform. And we can start to talk about electoral reform. We can talk about how, let's talk about the issues in 2020, just for 2 seconds as an example. The first thing that every logical Guyanese sat down and said is, the problem is with GCOM. The problem is with the GCOM commissioners, 3 from the government side, 3 from the main opposition side, and 1 single person in the middle. So the question is, just like Parliament, why do we even need that many people in GCOM then? If the government commissioners are going to obviously take the government side, the main opposition commissioners are obviously going to take their side, then we only need 1 person in the middle, because the two of them can cancel each other out. And that is the stalemate that we end up with every single time. But again, no interest whatsoever in even remotely talking about that problem. And the truth is, we are going to end up back in square one of not having constitutional reform until a third party goes in there and forces it.
Mr. Lowe, I'll have
Well, obviously I have some differences of opinion, even though my first involvement in political life in Guyana was with the constitutional reform movement, because I'm a big believer in reform. But I pointed to the Public Procurement Commission earlier in this discussion, which was the result of constitutional reform. So we've had constitutional reform in the past without necessarily needing that level of third-party engagement. But my concern really is that our institutions, perhaps because we're a small country, still are very, very weak. For the Public Procurement Commission to be saying it doesn't have the powers to investigate when plain as daylight in the Constitution it does, that concerns me. GCOM, I think, is also a question of where we can improve on. One of the things, and this is me speaking from my personal perspective, I believe that before we see appointments to many senior offices in Guyana, we need to have parliamentary hearings, and those who are up for those offices need to face questions before the public, and those who are not up for it should be removed, and those who are up for it should face a vote. Of course, they'll probably go through, but at least we'll have been able to ask them some hard questions and get a sense of how it is that they'll vote and how it is that they'll think. Before it is that they take on those offices. We've seen that be very effective in the United States, even though it's never going to be perfect, but I think that is definitely needed. And so I think really that there's room for constitutional reform, but that we need to really engage with a proper discussion on the topic, because we've had it before. And I'm here telling you that these people are just not using their constitutional powers, and that kind of sounds familiar, like a lot of different government agencies that are supposed to do things and just choose not to do them. That to me means that we got some systemic problems that continue to need to be addressed.
All right. I know we can talk a lot more about constitutional reform, but let us jump straight into communities. We would have seen recently the ministry would have gotten new leadership. That's the Ministry of Local Government, new leadership in communities. Communities are actually the backbone of any growing and thriving economy. Everything starts there, right? So my question is, given the diverse economic landscape in Guyana, how does this budget guarantee that both urban and rural communities would receive equitable attention and resources? So I'm not going to call anybody here. You can jump on it if you want to.
Well, the first thing I'd say though is it's being very polite to say that we've got a new minister for local government that's been put in place, and not to say that the previous minister appears to have left his post. I could be wrong, due to allegations of raping a minor Amerindian young lady. Now, when you talk about communities and equitable distribution of communities, let's talk about equitable justice. The Amerindian community, you've had many complaints over the years of abuse by government officials and so on in those communities. And we've not seen justice for people in those communities. We even saw the Dam fire that killed so many young people in Guyana. And while I know that there was an inquiry, I'm waiting to see what the results of that will be. That to me is another indication of where we need to have equitable justice in Guyana. But the Dam fire, one of the other things, and around that time you may recall that there were a couple of fires in Amerindian areas. It was clear that there was not equitable distribution of resources to fight fires. It's a dark situation to be talking about, but I made a joke to somebody that Jesus was born at Mita Fire Station, and we in Guyana are here bailing out with buckets and these types of things. It's really troubling. So to that end, I think there needs to be, given the events of last year, I think the government needed to have much more of a renewed focus on ensuring that across Guyana we have equitable access. I know that they think that building more hospitals and building more schools and so on constitutes everything with equitable access. But it's more than that. It's about ensuring that those, even in those communities, have the requisite base income to be able to leverage those opportunities. It has been indicated, I think there's a World Bank put out a study that poverty is most severe in rural Guyana. It's most severe amongst the Amerindian community.
Yeah.
So to my mind, when we're thinking about communities in Guyana, especially Amerindian communities, if they're facing such severe needs, We need to see a more focused approach from the government to deal with the challenges those communities face and to ensure that we can see good outcomes. Dealing directly with poverty is one, but it was indicated, and the Minister of Education confirmed this, that I think it was like 800 students, American students who wrote mathematics, that nobody got a 1, and only 17% passed. That again indicates to me that rural communities are neglected, and that the government doesn't really take seriously those communities. You can build schools, you can build hospitals, but you need to make sure they're staffed. You need to make sure that people have the base income necessary to be able to freely access those types of resources.
You would have talked about health. You would have mentioned hospitals. So let's jump right into health, right? We would have seen that in this year's budget, the minister with the responsibility of finance would have talked about injecting 129.8 billion for the health sectors. You would have talked, it kind of linked to the communities. We're building more and more hospitals, more and more schools, but our human resource capacity is lacking. We're going to, I'm not saying investing in hospitals are wrong, but we're not addressing the key concerns that are presently affecting the nation. Building more and more hospitals require more human resources. And with that, I'm going to jump.
Man, you're being too polite. You're going to build hospitals and there's no nurses to fill the hospitals.
That's true.
Who's going to be in these hospitals?
That's true. Our nurses are fleeing Guyana by the hour, by the day.
I mean, this is unbelievable.
And we've not seen yet a provision that addresses public servants in this budget.
Yeah.
I know you're very vocal on this. I've seen a lot of videos about you talking on behalf of public servants. You too, Jabour, not letting you out, right? But what are your thoughts of this government pushing such a big budget and not even mentioning the word public servant? Mind you, these are the people that carry out their day-to-day operation, because without them, there is no government, there is no success of the government.
Sure.
So let's have a discussion on that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm sure Kian will have some perspective on this as well. One of the things that seems evident from the way the government speaks about public servants is they see them as an expense and not an investment. They don't seem to believe that through training public servants, through paying public servants well, you can increase the efficiency, the quality of service delivery, and indeed retain your nurses and your teachers. In fact, one of the things that came up in the course of the debate, I don't know if you heard it because of, you can't really hear what speakers are saying within the National Assembly, quote unquote there, was that the government is looking to open some nursing schools, but if they don't pay nurses well, then they're training nurses for export. That to me is just a classic.
And then the finance minister would have lamented on that same thing, stating that we're training them to leave.
Well, one of the deeply ironic things is we saw the president berating, I think it was a report from the United Kingdom saying the United Kingdom stealing the nurses of Guyana. But I just want to make President aware that Guyana has a far higher GDP per capita purchasing power parity than the United Kingdom. So to me, it's pretty ironic for you to be complaining about somebody who has less money than you stealing your nurses. But of course the government likes to pretend that Guyana is not the country with the 10th highest per capita GDP in the entire world and could very well pay the nurses. As an example, we saw the national budget increase by 40% 3 years in a row. Did nurse pay increase by 40% 3 years in a row? No, it did not. And so clearly what's happened is that there's an underinvestment in the public service, even in areas where there's desperate need, because the government doesn't understand that this is the way that Guyana should be run, but also because they don't seem to see public servants as of any kind of use or benefit to the broader population. The downside of that is that we've got to put up now with the question of, if you go to a hospital, will there be nurses there even to assist? Will there be doctors there to assist? So they're going to build a lot of hospitals. You're going to show up, and it's you alone in the hospital looking for some assistance.
And the ironic thing that is, the finance minister would have stated, we're training nurses here to send them out. But now, during the course of the budget, they would have mentioned or having nurses come in the Cuban nurses. So it's kind of ironic that you would, push in this budget and you're saying one thing and you're doing the other, and it clearly shows that there isn't a planned vision, as both of you would have mentioned. So, Jabour, let me hear your take on this part.
You know what Cuban nurses can't do?
Cool.
No, my gosh. I'm sure they can cook.
Whoa!
That's like a drastic term. No, what Cuban nurses can't do is they can't vote. All right? And I think people need to take a step back and understand the political ramifications of ensuring all of your most intelligent and skilled labor leaves this country. All right? Let's start with the most simple concept. If only the uneducated and poor are left here, those are the easiest to control. Those are the easiest to manipulate. Those are the easiest to lie to. Okay? When you're a trained professional and you know what your job is and you know how things need to be run, then you can't be lied to by the government. We have a problem in this country where successive governments are happy for the brain drain. Get rid of all the smart people so we can ensure that the stupid people keep voting for us. It's as simple as that. Any way you twist or turn this is political strategy on both sides. All right? We have to understand that this brain drain didn't start today, didn't start this term, didn't start with this government. This has been a trend throughout Guyanese history. Okay? Starting from Burnham's days, all the way through to Chedi Jagan, all the way through to Barrett, all the way through to Hoyt, all the way through to now Irfan, Granger, everyone. Okay? This is what we learned very quickly. Anybody with a head on their shoulders, anybody with qualifications, all of us know that the smartest thing for us to do is head to greener pastures. And what does that do? It leaves this country as barren and rundown as it currently is. So when you ask me about why it's 6.5% or what is this government doing for poverty or what is this government doing for those engineers, doctors, nurses, teachers, even police for that matter, all right? They are ensuring that they keep them as poor and with their hand out, dependent, here you go, hand out as far as possible, begging for any little drop. Then we understand that they are ensuring that this country will stay exactly as it is. What I always love, and this is one of my favorite things to see every year. I had the fortunate, life of going to school in Canada and, spending quite a few years there. I've been back and forth between Guyana throughout my life, but I've been back here now for 15 years. My daughter was born here. I was here when I was, I did here all the way up to high school. And one of the coolest aspects just about yesterday is how this country gets so enthralled with budget day. And I sit down there and I say, you know what? Nowhere else in the world do I see people sitting down like glued to the television. What's the budget gonna be? You wanna know why? It's because we are so desperate for any help we can get. Everybody is sitting there hoping, oh my gosh, I hope my life gets better with this budget. How bad can our lives currently be that we need to beg year after year hoping that our lives get better? We think that this is acceptable. We think that the government spending our money, pretending like they're doing us a favor, we think that this is how society, a progressive society works, where the people are clearly not put first. Come on, I can't keep going over the most basic concept here. We can't even get into the details. 6.5%, as Elson mentioned, 40% increase in budget over the last 3 years, but not a 40% increase for standard of living for salaries. We know that they're trying to keep us poor, okay? We know that they encourage the corruption in areas like the police force and so on. All right, if we wanted our law, the laws exist. Keep this in mind. Everything you can imagine in Guyana, there are laws for speeding, drinking and driving, even corruption for that matter. But yet, it all currently still exists because there's no one enforcing them. That is why this country is left where it is. Because it's corruption all the way down from the top. Everybody doing their own thing. They like the fact that there's lawlessness. They like the fact that there's no sort of accountability. They like the fact that, if I just need to, because the government are the ones that break the most laws. You know what? I'm in control of the system. I make sure that the system works for me. That means I can do anything I want. And us, the people, guess what? ending up with the crumbles, the crumbs and getting nothing and going nowhere.
And we're on the topic of cost of living, and it has been a conversation being pushed by Guyanese year after year after year. We're seeing, and let me tell you, it's serious. It's very serious out there, where a number of families are living on that poverty line or even far below that line. Persons who can't have access to, for instance, quality health care in a sense. Given the potential impact of the cost of living currently in Guyana, are there any provisions that you would have heard or you would have read in Budget 2024 that will alleviate the burden on citizens? Not just that, but are also affected by the inflation rate.
So let me. My answer is very quick. The truth is, the government will sit here and celebrate the little increments of alleviation of poverty that they have put forward.
They're using the win is a win kind of concept.
Right. So here is my simple strategy, because you always hear yes, but you gotta be thankful for what you get, right?
A little more.
Right. Little more. It's like we begging for our own money. The truth is, I always use the analogy to understand why this system is flawed. And I need people to get this through their head to understand. Although both the APNU government and the PPP government can sit there and point to some of the good that they have done, I know every Guyanese in this country knows that it is not all they could have done. And that is the problem in this country. I don't want to know about the little you've done. I want you to prove to me that you have done all you can do to make sure that we are not impoverished and suffering in this country. I want you to show me that you have done everything in your power to make my life as good as possible, because that's my money, because I am the citizen and the government works for me. And if you can't prove that you have done all you can do, then I'm not accepting it. I don't care about the little mercies. Keep that. Show me that you've done all you can do, and I will accept whatever mercies I get after that.
One thing that I think we are neglecting a bit in the discussion around inflation and the cost of living is that the government's investment in across Guyana in terms of boosting production and increasing productivity so that we bring down prices has just not met the rate at which they have expanded the amount of dollars flowing through the economy. Now, just on a basic level, economists will tell you if you have the same amount of goods, but you have more dollars, that will mean that the dollars are worth less. That's your inflation, right? Your prices are going up, your money is not stretching as far. I was quite alarmed to hear the Minister for Finance indicate that we've got nearly a 25% increase in the number of dollars in the Guyanese economy last year, which to me indicates that we've got a serious inflation problem. In fact, at the end of last year's budget, when I saw that they again increased the budget by 40%, I think I sat down and calculated something like a 7% inflation rate. And we've got 6.6% coming out of it. So that is very much in line. Of course, the government is trying to pretend that there is not a high level of inflation, saying, 2% last year, 2.5% this coming year. That to me is absurd. If you are increasing the amount of dollars in the economy and not taking the appropriate measures to deal with the effects of that, not appropriately boosting expanding your production, that to me is going to put you in a recipe for disaster when it comes to the cost of living, when it comes to inflation. Just on a rough level, there's different factors that will affect it. But if you increase the money supply by 25%, then you need to increase the goods produced in the country by 25% in order to not have an inflationary effect. Even if the government wants to say, 11% non-oil economy growth, they needed to do 25% in order to combat inflation. So they're still way behind where they needed to be. So what I'm getting at is that the government's profligate spending, just spending, without really a focus on productivity, bringing down costs, efficiencies, has led to a situation where money is sloshing around, people aren't getting access that need to get access, and prices are going up. This to me will continue to be a problem this year. And I'm alarmed to see that the government perhaps not wanting to recognize this problem has only put aside a little $7 billion for cost of living, direct cost of living mitigation, when we've got a very, very serious cost of living problem in this country. And when there is anticipation that you may see inflationary pressures going forward in 2024.
I just want to touch, I've been following post pre-budget and post-budget on the reviews and so on. These are some of the things that Guyanese are saying that they need, but it seems as if the government is not listening. These are some of the things. Transportation to take the children and maybe teachers to and from school due to the current transportation issue in the country. Improve classrooms and spaces. People are calling, and these are from the university student, free university now, better security, an increase in wages, clean water, and the list goes on. And these are comments that are coming from Guyanese across this country. These are comments coming from Guyanese across the country. So I want to shift our attention. We're going to remain on the budget, but I want to shift our attention. You would have touched earlier on gender based, and you would have referenced a number of issues relating to that. With the focus on gender based related issues, what steps should have been taken to ensure that this budget promotes gender equality and addresses the disparities identified in social considerations?
Well, one of the things I would say is I think it was clear last year that Guyana's social services framework and infrastructure is sorely lacking. That we did not have really, I think, the robust social mechanisms that needed to be in place to support those who were, I have to say allegedly at this point, making allegations regarding sexual violence and sexual assault. That to me was very disappointing and concerning, and it was really a failure to defend the citizens of Guyana in that respect. And I think that rather than focusing on what sounds to me like PUF projects, men on a mission, these types of PUF projects, I think we need to see more substantial and serious funding for things like mental health, for things like counseling, legal assistance and legal aid. Those are the types of mechanisms that I believe we really need to see in the country as we try to address these types of problems. To me, the puffery of things like men on a mission and so on is a bit reminiscent of when Melania Trump was the biggest anti-cyberbullying advocate in America. Meanwhile, it's her husband was cyberbullying everybody else. So, you can't just have a policy in name. You need to have actions that meet those policies.
Jabour.
We're in a very interesting position in this country when it comes to gender equality, and it's obviously a very multifaceted situation. Let me say that I don't think Guyana in particular, outside of the opportunity for education, and that and even that is not all entirely on the government, is one of the root causes for there to be such a large inequality as far as gender roles go, women versus men. When I say that, we see the effects of them not having the opportunity to be educated because their families didn't send the young girls to school, or they were in remote areas that, again, that would be the government's fault, or the reality of having such a what's the word I'm looking for, this very masculine dominance in our society that have caused women to not really have equal opportunity. And how we alleviate something like that is, in my opinion, is with two factors. One of them is when you come to the social issues, a large basis of it is mental health. All right, and we have to be realistic, as Elson mentioned, we have to be realistic in the programs we are putting forward to ensure that, you know, everyone is protected, all right, and everybody is educated and everybody has the opportunity to access those services. The next part, again, obviously, what comes with ensuring there's equality in our society is education, is equal opportunity, as I mentioned earlier. So when those two factors clearly are not given the attention that is required from our 2024 budget, which is a very poor showing, and I'll give you an example of this. What is very interesting about the education budget is, although we are now top 10 in the world for GDP, all right, per capita, the reality is our education spending, our per capita, is one of the lowest in the world. All right, and this is something that I think people need to start wrapping their head around, because it shows clearly an indication that the government has really no interest in ensuring the population becomes better educated. So right off the bat, if you turn to them and say, what are you doing to help alleviate gender inequality? The truth is, if they're not focusing on education, then there's not much being done. You're not going to sit down there and say, but we give plenty women money to open businesses. I'm sorry, if they are not educated in order to run those businesses, then guess what? It's going to fail, and we will be back to square one. Now we sit down here and we say, well, what are you doing to protect women from abuse or you know, sexual assault or any of these types of issues? And what we know as a society, and we see in the research around the world, mental health is the #1 cause for those things. Now, if I sit down here and say, well, there's no counseling in schools, children in primary schools are not given mental health education, they don't have any coping mechanisms for their anger, they aren't given opportunities to properly learn how to communicate or how to internally deal with their personal mental health, or even recognize that it exists, then guess what? The abuse and the sexual assault and all the horrible things in society, the murder and etc., are going to continue. So when you ask me on a very fundamental basis if enough has been done, the truth is no, because those two areas are the main areas that the gender equality is lacking. It's a recipe to continue, because clearly not even remotely close to enough is being done.
Well, you know, I'd say mental health is a factor, but I do think that we don't want to separate the question of responsibility and also of violence perpetuated against women by men. When we've got a culture that has sadly normalized that kind of violence, really in Guyana, if you hear that a woman has been shot, as an example, you kind of expect that the man committed suicide, right? That kind of is the trend. To me, that means that we have to have more comprehensive social programs and a more comprehensive national conversation around this. And really, we need to also look at the statistics and be monitoring it. What concerns me about programs like Men on a Mission is you hear about it once and then you never hear about any statistics afterward as to what the progress made was. And
they just come for clean up the country when the time.
Just build a house here and there.
Is there an expectation within the 5 years we will reduce this by X% or something like that? I mean,
they're receiving budgetary allocations as well too, right?
I believe they do receive an allocation. I think it comes down to the office of the president, but I have to check that. But anyway, that's my point. But that attitude towards governance and monitoring and mechanisms to evaluate, that's not really that the PUP's cup of tea, if you understand.
All right, I know we're fast. The time is against us, but I just want to close with this final question. $1 trillion budget is before all of us. People are saying, we've never seen that sum of money. Even to my younger brother is saying, well, the money come from, right? Why we couldn't have put it there, here, and here, all of a sudden $1 trillion budget. But with such a large budget comes debt. And I think most persons in Guyana really don't talk about it. They see a budget is pushing, they see this is what is coming. So in addressing the public debt concerns, what measures you think, both of you, can be put in place to prevent the accumulation of unsustainable levels of debt and ensuring that there's a long-term fiscal sustainability?
Well, just to start off with one that Kian might find entertaining. I could have sworn I heard government say they're going to change the law, the NRF law, to withdraw more money.
They did.
So the thing is, this government passed this law only a couple of years ago, and I said this law is an abomination. This law has removed the oversight mechanisms that were there. You had an economic committee that was to evaluate how much the economy could take over the course of a year, so we don't have inflationary pressures. Surprise, surprise, you have inflationary pressures. Those are the types of things that remove universal Guyana representative removed, representatives from the legal and accounting fraternities and so on removed, people who could have added monitoring and oversight. Now we're seeing the government change the rules so they can withdraw more, which to me indicates that when it comes to servicing our debt, that kind of an approach could potentially put us in a vulnerable space. Now, that is not to say that we can't manage debt if we're thoughtful about it. We, of course, in Guyana have received tens of millions of dollars of interest payments last year just from the funds that were sitting in the NRF themselves. And so there are revenues available. What we've got to do as a country is to have in our mind how much money we want to have in the NRF as a backstop in the event that there's a fall in the price of oil. We can sustain quite a large amount of debt. Our debt to GDP ratio has fallen sharply. We have a lot of capacity to sustain debt. However, we have to understand the type of industry we're in. It's not like a technology industry where you can reasonably rely on revenues and so on. Tomorrow, the price of oil could suddenly fall to $40 a barrel for some reason. And people will say, oh, that could never happen, but you recall the pandemic, where it was negative oil prices. Therefore, we have to look at managing our NRF in such a way that we have appropriate capacities to deal with these types of issues. Now, expanding the government budget so sharply without the appropriate mechanisms to grow the non-oil economy and without the appropriate reforms so that we can save money, to me, means that our debt is not being managed responsibly, because if it were being managed responsibly, we'd be a lot more thoughtful about what we're doing with money, not just spending because we happen to have a high oil price.
You want to touch on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start with something that I think I wanted to point out based on the first comment you made of
NRF rules.
Of the NRF rules, right? And the new laws that are changing. So one of the things that the government said when they first changed the NRF rules was that any sort of accountability, any withdrawal that needs to be made public, any sort of mismanagement will fall on the shoulders of the Minister of Finance. And that person, and they made this headlines, that person can go to jail if they do not properly have accountability. Now, let's start with, I would like to ask, my friend in the main opposition here, who exactly is the current Minister of Finance?
I have no idea.
Well, neither do I. So what I found fantastic about this scenario is that there is no Minister of Finance. They have created a loophole that they can pretty much do anything they want and there is nobody accountable for it. So let's start with that basic scenario. All right? Now, when you ask me what the government should do in an event of an oil, cost of oil plummet, the reality is the government just came out with a statement that I am going to first challenge the government to prove. Okay? They said that the non-oil economy grew by 11%. Now, I would like the government to show these citizens, to show all of us, where the growth occurred and in which areas of the non-oil economy. Because I can tell you, I was on the rice board up to 2023. Just so you know, the government has removed me from that.
Oh.
I did not quit. The government just decided. Coming on to election season, maybe Kian shouldn't be part of the GRDB anymore. Not a problem. Who am I to sit there and challenge the government's decisions? But nonetheless, now when I look at the mining sector, when I look at the timber sector, when I look at rice, when I look at sugar, oh my gosh, sugar, sugar, and all of the rest of our natural resources, whatever it be, sand, etc. The truth of the matter is, I can argue that I have seen little to no growth in any of these areas. Okay? I can tell you for a fact that the rice industry in particular, having lost in 2022, having lost our largest market, which was the European market, because Guyana has no standards whatsoever when it comes to pesticide control in the rice, has been banned from sending rice to Europe. Now, hustling to find markets, that was our second biggest industry behind gold. You tell me how the non-oil industry could have grown. Now let's talk to any gold miner currently in the country. Let's talk to any gold buyer currently in the country. Anybody involved in the gold industry. Do you hear raving reviews about how great gold is doing? That how much gold is being produced? As a matter of fact, let us look at the declaration of gold that has occurred. And you tell me how you can possibly have lost in gold and rice, our two largest non-oil producers, and yet we have grown 11%. Where? Now, my challenge to the government is to produce those statistics and prove that number. Now, if you ask me, again as a leader, how I would then protect Guyana, the truth is the non-oil economy is our key element of protection, is our buffer zone. Oil essentially is free money, okay? We have hit the lottery, okay? In any way, shape or form you twist this is our money that God sent for us, okay? This does not exist anywhere in the world. This is a rare occasion. We hit it. We get lucky. Okay, we all pray for it all day. Please make our lives better, and guess what? God answer. All right? So now we have more money than we can ever know what to do with. All right? But the truth is, if not managed properly, it disappears just as fast. And all we have to be putting in place now is sustainable development in our non-oil economy, our agriculture, our banking system. We have a million ways that we can, or tourism sector, we have a million ways that instead of the government coming with these little frecks of spending in these areas and pretending, I'll bring it in 500 sheep, don't worry, agriculture saved, you know what I mean? Like, it's such a joke that those little things that they keep, making big deals out of all over the government news agencies that are pretending to be something realistic or robust or substantial. The truth is, if oil plummets now, we are probably in a worse position than we were before we found oil. So, at the end of the day, the government has to start being realistic in what they're doing with our human capital, all right, with our earning capacity outside of oil, and start realistically using our oil, our God-sent oil lottery money, if you will, our oil money, and using it into people capital and our non-oil economy.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on the program. So, Budget 2024 is trying to achieve something, but there are still a number of lingering issues, as both Jabour and Mr. Lowe would have discussed. As citizens, we need to remain vigilant. We need to ensure that this budget in its form is implemented correctly, that there is transparency and there is accountability. We need to hold those in office accountable. That is the only way we're going to win as citizens.